kind of, risks apart from the kind of the benefits that we just talked? Do you see any other risk how this could fall apart, especially for Iran's side?
Uh, one can point to quite a few risks, of course, on the Iranian side, and that's because of the shaky situation that Iran has domestically, and also the uncertain sort of international prospect for those files in which Iran is involved. For example, the case of the nuclear issue or the Ukraine war. So to be more specific, for example, as part of the agreement, if Iran effectively stops its support for the Houthis or other non-state armed groups throughout the region, as has been asked by the Saudis and others, that would amount to a huge basically prestige, a huge damage to its prestige. The Islamic Republic being the Islamic Republic and being, as they say, the center of this resistance in the region. So that would cause Iran sort of losing at least some of its allies. And here it is important to see if Iran is going to get something in return, because one of the incentives for Iran since 1980s, since the early years after the revolution, for working with those non-state actors, apart from this exporting of the revolution idea, has been the fact that Iran has been seen as a pariah, and because of the lack of state allies, it went through building its network of non-state allies. So this is important. So if Iran loses that and gets nothing in return, then that would be huge damage to its to the Islamic Republic's basically interests. So that's one thing. And apart from that, of course, we also need to be, of course, I think, cautious in making any sort of certain prediction about the realization of Saudi investment or other Arab investment in Iran, because as I just mentioned, Saudi Arabia still values a lot its relationship with the United States, and for the same reason that almost a couple of years after UAE normalized with Syria, no investment, no Emirati investment has happened in Syria because of the sanctions, the Caesar Act in that case. The same might happen in the case of Iran if the sanctions remain. So then it would be important to see to what extent China is going to go against the interests of, for example, the interest that it has in relation with the United States, for example, and ignore the sanctions. If China as a great power does that, and if China can guarantee something, in concrete terms, then that might happen. Otherwise, it's really difficult for me to see at the current stage how Iran's expectations of kind of massive Arab investment and a kind of fundamental improvement of economic situation in the country is going to be materialized. It is already affecting the market in Iran, but that's the psychological effect, because one day, literally one day after the agreement was announced, the value of Iran's currency improved. I don't know, to maybe something like
significantly.
20%. But that's the psychological impact, because afterwards, step by step, it's going back to where it was. So unless something concrete happens on the ground, and unless some real investment comes into the country, or some money is released in terms of the assets that are frozen, I just mentioned, then it's as I said, it would be difficult to predict any substantial shifts.
So let's talk more about China then, and the role. I suppose you were also surprised, like many of us. So how do you see China's role? Maybe broader in the Middle East as a kind of peace broker, or like in general, what is China's role? What are China's incentives and opportunities? What are you doing there?
Yeah, first of all, I I'm not as enthusiastic as or as concerned, depending on the perspective, as some people who are talking about basically China replacing the United States in the region, or pushing the US out of the region, whatever. It's not about China pushing somebody out. It's about China filling a vacuum already created there. So this is important. I don't remember the exact person, but there was a quote I remember from the time I was working on my PhD, actually, from a Chinese official, saying that, basically, wherever the United States marches forward, we go a little bit back. But whenever they go back, we will go ahead. So it's a very calculated approach. And for China, it's like, they see the need of those countries on the one hand, and also they see the need for stability in the region. So any sort of tension, conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia would be detrimental to China's interest. Just imagine if Iran's threats of closing the Strait of Hormuz, for example, is going to be materialized. Who's going to be damaged the most? It's China. It's not Europe. It's not the United States. It's China. So in that sense, China has its own interests in making peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And of course, those two countries, because Iran has been kind of considering China as a long-term alternative for the West after all these disappointments with in its relationship with the West. And Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, in the context of its sort of balanced foreign policy. So it's all about regional actors trying to adapt themselves to the changing realities of the international politics, and China as the kind of rising power trying to secure its interests and also expand its influence wherever possible. So I still don't see this as sort of a sign of a new rivalry between China and the United States. There is still no sign that, at least in the short term, that China will become a kind of the go-to party actually for all different sorts of conflicts of the region. This is something Chinese have been wishing for, maybe because they also proposed, it was actually 2 years ago, almost, that China proposed the formation of a regional forum with the participation of all regional countries, and all regional countries also means Israel, whose existence Iran doesn't accept. So in that sense, China is also in a learning process in the Middle East, and with all these sort of nuances and delicate matters there. And maybe a comparison would help, because I clearly remember in 2015 when the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, was signed, the Chinese foreign minister was not even there when the agreement was announced. So he left. And because, China was there as just having the formal status in the UN Security Council. But one cannot imagine such a thing right now. We are seeing a new China, and of course also a new region. So it's a trend. It's nothing has fixed yet, and it also depends on the extent to which the United States wants or is able to meet the expectations of its partners, like Saudi Arabia. There was just one day before the agreement, and this is, of course, the timing was meaningful, I think. One day before the announcement of the Iran-Saudi agreement, there was this Wall Street Journal report about the list of the demands that the Saudis had presented to the US, including security guarantees, including helping in the development of their nuclear program. So these are, I think, still on the table. The Saudis are trying to sell it to the best offer. And so there's still a lot of uncertainties, I think, in that sense, when it comes to the role of China and this China-US dichotomy in the Middle East.
It's very interesting. Before this agreement, several commentators, so Middle East commentators, were pretty much saying that, there's just instability that they see in the future in the Middle East. And now they are all flipped. They now see it, well, it might be one of the most stable regions, actually. So it's, would you agree with that, first of all? Or
If there is just one rule, sorry, in the Middle East, it's unpredictability.
Right.
And the Middle East never stops to amaze the observers and public in general. So in that sense, I think we need to keep our optimism sort of contained in a way, because of course Iran-Saudi conflict, if you may say, has been one of the main areas of potential tension, kind of explosion points, potential explosion points of the Middle East. But it's just one of them. The more important one is still the Iran-Israeli conflict, for which I don't see still any sort of clear prospect for it to be resolved. Let me be actually a little bit optimistic here.
Okay.
And to say that depending on the role China is going to play, that issue can also be somehow addressed. I'm not saying it's going to be solved, but somehow addressed, because again, China, if you consider China's sort of interest in stability in the region, and put it in the context of the initiatives, as I mentioned, that the Chinese have already presented, it means that they really want to do something about that. And again, it's only China which has an actual leverage on Iran. It was Russia also, but now the relationship has sort of reversed, because it's Iran now providing drones to Russia. So Iran's leverage over Russia is, if not more, at least at the same level as the Russians. So I really believe that China has the capacity, at least, to push Iran and Israel towards some sort of modus vivendi, at least. And I don't really expect any sort of normalization, or even Iran coming out publicly accepting Israel as a state, as long as Islamic Republic is the Islamic Republic. And I'm quite clear about that, because this is something tied to the core of the identity of the Islamic Republic. The moment that Islamic Republic, accepts Israel, it's not Islamic Republic anymore. It's something else. And they don't want, especially as long as the clerics are there, they don't want this to happen, because that's the ideology upon which they have built the whole political system, the whole regime.
Right.
So that's not going to happen unless a fundamental change in Iran happens, either a regime change towards a more democratically sort of represented country, or some sort of fundamental change from within that would push ideology to the corner. But as I said, in terms of modus vivendi, that may happen. So to sum it up, I would say it's still really difficult to see this as, sort of pushing the region towards a more peaceful settlement between different actors. But it shows that there is the potential, and there are actors, or better to say, actor, the China here, with the capacity to do so.
So, Hamid, if you think about over the last week, a lot of commentators have really addressed disagreement, and now we obviously want to have some sort of outlook, or everyone is giving their outlook. So, what are views that you think are not correct, or that you would disagree with? Do you have anything, any kind of out of consensus views where like most people would disagree with you?
I don't know, because there's been, I mean, I can hardly remember an issue over the past decade that has been so widely discussed, so widely covered, so widely analyzed from different angles as the Iran-Saudi agreement. And I have really hadn't the time to go through
Sure.
all of them actually. But the thing is that, as I said, there are some, I already mentioned actually, there are some too optimistic or too pessimistic sort of analysis of the situation and of this agreement, with which I really don't agree, because on the one side, many people tend to say that this is a huge blow to the role of the United States in the region. As I said, I don't agree, and I'm not thinking that the United States has basically woken up to a surprise. This is something, a result of their policies and their deliberate strategy in terms of shifting actually toward the east, containing China from its own neighborhood, things like that. So the Middle East is not the same as it was before in the US grand strategy. And on the other side, of course, I don't agree with some very optimistic views, especially those presented inside these two countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, that it's going to be the end of hostilities. It's going to be sort of actual new beginning in the relationship. It is a huge development, as I said, and the potential is still there. But we need to be really cautious in our analysis, because first we need to wait for these 2 months to see if for example, the embassies are going to be reopened, actually, if nothing is going to collapse. And after 2 months, maybe we can, at least with a sort of better prospect, start to analyze that. So yeah, that's what my analysis may differ. I tend to stay in the middle and to look at the developments coming from both sides, and also from different levels, from the international level and domestic levels, and to continue analyzing this situation. So this is important. This is not a fixed event for us to analyze. This is a trend, and we need to have like constant analysis of
Confirmation.
Yeah, exactly, of the situation, to see where it is going toward, actually.
And being an optimist on this, but with gathering data and confirmation. If you think about it on a final note, what would be one of these confirmation signals that you are looking for?
It would be, I mean, to me, the eventual success of this agreement would depend on the materialization of that economic aspect. Right. Nothing in the region, especially these days, will remain in place without having an economic element. The role of China in the region, the foundation of that actually was economic. And in that sense, because you cannot change history, you cannot put aside all those kind of constructed, I would say, or actual, constructed and actual hostility between Iran and Saudi Arabia, given the ideological, religious, all this sort of differences. So what's the key to a better relationship? It's economy. So if I see concrete news about the Saudis, doing this or that investment, or a financial channel actually being established between the two countries, then I would say, okay, this is a new phase, and we can be more optimistic about it.
All right. Hamid, apart from Cassandra, where can people follow you?
I am quite active on Twitter, so you can search my name, find me there, and also on LinkedIn. So these are the two platforms I regularly share my works, and also kind of my views depending on the development. So I will be happy to share them with broader public, of course, whoever is interested.
That was great. I learned a lot. Thank you so much, Hamid, for your time. Cheers.
Thank you very much.